The year was 1865, and the frontier was a land of both opportunity and death. Rachel Wren stood on the splintered porch of her one-room cabin, watching the sky burn orange with the last light of day. Her hands, cracked and calloused from years of hard living, gripped the rifle resting across her chest. Snow clung to the eaves like a warning, and a wind out of the north whispered of things coming, cold things, sharp things. Her dog, Jasper, let out a low, wary growl. She narrowed her eyes toward the timberline, where the black pines stood hunched like old men watching a funeral. Something had spooked the dog, and Jasper wasn't prone to fits. The rifle came up as instinct, but nothing stirred beyond the fence where the snow lay, unbroken. Then she saw it, a smear of red trailing through the white, like a ribbon dropped from a wound. Rachel didn't move at first. Blood out here could mean anything. A wounded elk, a coyote's kill, or worse. She stepped off the porch, boots crunching into the frozen crust. Jasper paced beside her, nose low, tail stiff. The blood trail led around the side of the cabin, through the skeleton remains of her vegetable patch, and into the woods beyond. Rachel hesitated at the tree lean. The last time she'd gone into those woods alone, she'd come out with her husband's body in a mule cart and silence in her soul that had never left. Still, she followed. The trail was a ragged line, dark and wet, soaking deep into the snow. She moved slow, careful not to disturb the prints too much, small, deliberate steps, the kind a man makes when he's wounded and doesn't want to fall. The trees pressed close, branches heavy with ice. The wind whistled through them, like someone crying far off. Rachel found him not 10 yards from the creek, crumpled under a cedar, motionless. A young Comanche brave, maybe 20, maybe younger, his shoulders slick with blood and his chest barely rising under the hide and cloth he wore. He was sprawled on his side, one arm awkward beneath him, as though he'd tried to crawl and given up. A crude bandage made from a torn saddle blanket had slipped from his shoulder. His face was too still. Rachel knelt beside him, gun still in one hand. She wasn't sure why she didn't just end it. Her finger hovered near the trigger. This was the kind of Indian they warned about in town. Raiders who torched barns, slit throats, stole women. Her own husband, Eli, had died during such a raid, shot in the back while trying to run cattle away from the flames. But this boy, this man, he wasn't holding a weapon. He wasn't wearing war paint or grinning like the devil. He was half dead in the snow, lips blue, blood soaking the earth beneath him. Jasper crept forward and sniffed at him, then whimpered. Rachel muttered under her breath and lowered the rifle. "Damn you," she whispered. She wasn't sure if she meant the boy, the land, or herself. It took everything she had to drag him back through the snow. He moaned once, soft and broken, when she shifted his weight, but didn't wake. His skin was hot despite the cold, fever already taking hold. She propped him against the porch, then opened the cabin door with her boot and hauled him inside. The air within was thick with wood smoke and the faint tang of lye soap. A cast iron stove glowed dim in the corner. She cleared the cot in the back, sweeping off sewing scraps and an old Bible, then laid him down and tore the blanket off the window to cover him. He stirred again, a pained breath catching in his throat. She knelt beside him and pressed a hand to his forehead, hot as sun-baked tin. The wound on his shoulder had reopened. She worked quickly, washing the gash with snow melt and whiskey, stitching with a steady hand that had sewn plenty of shirts and 2 bullet wounds before this. He groaned again, but didn't fight her. She bound the wound tightly and fed him a few drops of water with a spoon. Night came fast and black, pressing against the windows like a living thing. Rachel sat in the rocker across the room, rifle propped beside her, staring at the sleeping Comanche. Her hands trembled when she finally let them. She should have left him to the cold. That's what folks would say. That's what they'd expect. If the men in town found out, she'd be hanged for treason or worse. They didn't take kindly to women doing things without asking, especially not things that smelled like sympathy. She thought of her brother Jonah, gone 10 years now, left to rot on some battlefield in Virginia. This Comanche boy looked like him in a strange way, thin, proud, too stubborn to die quick. By dawn, snow had stopped falling, but the cold hadn't lifted. Rachel was outside chopping kindling when the riders came. 3 of them. Sheriff Carver in the lead, his bay gelding puffing steam. Beside him rode Elias Granger, who used to eye her like a widow's sadness was an open invitation. Last was young Micah Bell, whose eyes never stopped twitching. Rachel straightened, axe in hand, wiping sweat from her brow. "Morning, Miss Wren," Carver said, voice like gravel. "Heard someone might have seen a trail up this way. You see anything strange last night?" Rachel forced a half-smile. "Strange relative out here, Sheriff. You mean aside from Jasper barking at squirrels?" Granger's eyes swept toward the cabin. "Tracks out by the trees. Fresh blood, too. Hunted a fox," she lied easily. "Damn thing went after my hens. Didn't get far." Micah dismounted, walked toward the porch. Rachel tensed. "Mind if we look around?" Carver asked, but didn't wait for her answer. Rachel didn't move from the woodpile. "You're welcome to, but I'd like my warrant in writing first. You know how the law works, don't you, Sheriff?" Carver frowned, but nodded to Micah, who backed off. "We'll be keeping an eye out, Miss Wren. Town's uneasy. One of them Comanches got away 2 nights back after a raid on the Jenkins farm. Thought maybe he bled out, but you know how devils are. Tough to kill." Rachel met his eyes. "So are people with nothing left to lose." They left after a few more questions, and she didn't move until their horses were specks on the horizon. Inside, the Comanche still lay silent, though his brow twitched under fever. She checked his wound again, dry but inflamed. She boiled willow bark and made a tonic. He drank it unconsciously, lips parting just enough. Days passed. Rachel spoke little, but the boy began to stir. He opened his eyes once, dark and alert, but clouded with pain, and muttered something in his own tongue. She replied with silence. When he finally spoke English, it was rough, as though each word had to be remembered. "Why?" he asked one morning, voice hoarse. "Why not kill?" She didn't look up from stirring the stew. "Wasn't my day to play God." He said nothing for a long while. Then, "Name is Tama." "Rachel." Another silence, this one not as sharp. A kind of truce. He healed slow. His fever broke on the 7th night, and after that he began to sit up, eat broth, watch her with quiet eyes that saw more than she liked. He never asked where his people were, and she didn't ask what he'd done before she found him. Some things weren't meant to be spoken out here. Jasper adjusted quickly, always had a strange sense about people. He curled by Tama's feet like they were brothers born. But the world beyond the cabin didn't sit so still. It was Mrs. Ellis who saw the tracks. She lived a mile up the ridge and passed by once a week with preserves and gossip. She didn't say anything then, but Rachel noticed her looking too long at the woods, too hard at the prints by the barn. 3 nights later, a lantern flickered near the creek. Watching, waiting. Rachel loaded her shotgun and kept it close. Tama saw the tension in her eyes. "They will come. I know. I leave." "No," she snapped, then softened. "You step outside, and they'll shoot you before your feet hit the dirt. They don't need proof. Just a name." Tama tilted his head. "Then why keep me?" She looked at him, at the scarring on his shoulder, the way his hands rested lightly like a man trained to hold blades. He had killed, of that she was sure. But she'd killed too, during the siege at Fort Spencer, and no one ever called her savage for it. "Because I'm tired of burying people," she said. He nodded, like that made sense. Maybe it did. On the 10th day, they heard hoofbeats again, closer this time. 4, maybe 5 riders. Rachel opened the floorboards behind the stove and helped Thomas slip down into the narrow space beneath. He didn't argue. When a knock came, it was hard enough to rattle the frame. Sheriff Carver pushed in without invitation. "We found tracks. Boot prints. He's here, isn't he?" Rachel stood in the center of the room, unarmed. Her hands were calm. "You got a warrant?" Carver growled. "Town's law says we don't need one when we're hunting killers. You'll find no killers here. Only me." The men fanned out. One headed toward the back, another toward the stove. Rachel moved with sudden purpose, stepping between him and the floorboards. "Touch that, and you'll find out what a woman's wrath feels like." Carver raised a hand to stop his man. His eyes narrowed. "You sure you want to play this game, Rachel?" She held his gaze. "I'm already playing it." He lingered a moment longer, then turned. "You'll regret lying for him." Maybe, she said, but I'll sleep better than you. They left again, this time slower, more deliberate. The message was clear. Next time, they wouldn't knock. Rachel knelt beside the stove and tapped twice. Tama rose from the shadows, dirt smudging his face. His eyes found hers in the half-dark. "Why do you fight for me?" he asked. She smiled, faint and tired. "Maybe I'm not fighting for you." He didn't speak, but his eyes softened. That night, snow fell again, heavier than before. Outside, the wind screamed across the plains. Inside, a fire crackled, and for the first time in years, Rachel Wren didn't feel completely alone. She had no illusions. The days ahead would not be kind. The townsfolk would not forget. But something had shifted inside her, and perhaps in him too. She sat by the window, watching the world vanish beneath the snow. Behind her, Thomas slept. The rifle lay across her knees. The silence between them was no longer empty. She'd lost everything before. Her name, her family, her place. But now, she found something worth risking it all for. Mercy. The wind came screaming through the canyons that morning, hurling needles of ice against the cabin walls. Rachel Wren stood at the woodpile, splitting logs with the precision of a surgeon. Each strike sent a sharp echo into the cold sky, a heartbeat against the silence of the snow-drowned world. Her shoulders ached, her fingers were stiff, but her mind burned like the stove inside. Tama watched her from the window, sitting now, his strength returning day by day. He'd said little since the sheriff's second visit, but his eyes told stories. In them, she saw fire, not fear, simmering waiting. She didn't ask about his past. He didn't offer it. But something about the way he stood, silent and straight-backed in the mornings, told her the boy who'd bled out in her snow was long gone. What remained was a warrior, tempered and reshaped by fire and survival. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with pine smoke and something heavier, tension that wouldn't settle. Rachel had taken to bolting the door and bracing it with a chair. She slept with the rifle propped beside her bed and a Bowie knife under the pillow. Tama never questioned the precautions. He simply watched, absorbing the details, always alert. The town, once a day's ride but now a world away, had not gone quiet. 3 barns had burned in the past week. Livestock stolen, fences cut, 2 men dead. One gutted, the other found hanging from a cottonwood with a sign pinned to his chest. Scrawled in black charcoal, "Justice for the slaughtered." The settlers, already coiled tight with fear, now bristled with fury. They blamed Comanches, of course. Said the raids had returned. That the treaty signed 2 winters past was nothing but smoke in the wind. And every night, Rachel listened to the low thunder of hoofbeats in the distance. Patrols, posses, hunters masquerading as protectors. It was only a matter of time. One night, she found Tama outside, standing barefoot in the snow. His chest was bare, wounds fully healed, a thin sheen of sweat rising from his skin despite the cold. In his hand, he held a coal from the stove, pinched between 2 fingers, glowing red like a star between heavens. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice sharp with worry. He didn't look at her. Remembering, she stepped closer. "You'll burn yourself." "I've already burned," he said. "Now I teach my flesh to listen again." She didn't speak, only watched as he dropped the coal into the snow and let the steam rise between them. Later that night, as they shared silence over boiled beans and black coffee, Tama finally broke it. "You want to know what happened?" he said. Rachel looked up from her tin cup, surprised. "No, I want to know if it's going to follow you here." "It already has," he said. "Then, they came to my village after we surrendered. We gave them our bows, our horses, promised peace. But peace don't live in the mouths of white men. Not these ones." He stared at the fire, and Rachel saw his knuckles whiten around the cup. They waited until the women were gathering water. Then they came with rifles. Not army, settlers, vigilantes. Said we'd taken cattle. Said we'd stolen land that never belonged to us. They shot the old ones first. Laughed while they did it. "My sister," she ran. I followed. I killed one with a knife made of flint and willow bone. His blood was cold like the river. Then they shot me and left me in the snow." Rachel swallowed, throat thick with something that felt like sorrow and rage mixed in equal parts. "I'm sorry." "No," he said. "You saved me. You already paid." That night, he didn't sleep. She heard him pacing, and in the still hours before dawn, he began to chant. Low, rhythmic, words not meant for her ears, words that sounded like mourning and promise woven into one. When the sun rose, he was gone. Rachel found his tracks leading west, toward the canyon rim. He hadn't taken a horse, only the clothes on his back and a knife she didn't remember handing him. Her heart thundered. She stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the place where his prints vanished into the frozen brush. And then she did something she hadn't done in years. She prayed. It was 3 days before she saw him again. She had just returned from checking the traps when she spotted movement by the tree lean. Her breath caught. Thomas stumbled from the woods, blood on his hands, smoke clinging to his hair. He didn't speak, only nodded once, and felt his knees in front of her. She dropped beside him, feeling his forehead. No fever. The blood wasn't his. "What did you do?" she asked, voice a whisper. His reply was simple. "I spoke." She didn't understand at first, but the news came fast. A posse of 6 men had gone missing near Bitter Creek. Found 2 days later, 5 of them dead, burned in their own campfire, the 6th tied to a stake with his eyelids cut. The only thing he could say before dying was a name, Tama. The town ignited. Sheriff Carver rallied every man with a rifle. Granger offered a bounty, $50 for the scalp of the Comanche who killed his son. Micah Bell swore he'd seen Rachel riding with an Indian not a week past. They branded her a traitor. Rachel Wren became an outlaw in her own land overnight. The 3rd night after Tama's return, she packed 2 saddlebags, flour, dried meat, a map of the mountains, 1 can of gunpowder. She didn't ask where they were going. He didn't say. But when he looked at her and said, "We ride before dawn," she nodded without hesitation. Before they left, she walked the cabin one last time, touching the things that once meant home. Eli's pipe, her father's rocking chair, a faded photograph of her mother in a locket. She took none of it. Outside, the horses pawed at the earth, restless. Jasper barked once and leapt into the saddlebag. They rode north, following the river that carved the world in half. The wind howled through the cliffs like a choir of ghosts, but neither of them looked back. By the 5th day, they reached the bluffs above Black Hollow. Below them lay the town, once bustling, now buzzed with fear. Men stood on rooftops, rifles in hand. Smoke trailed from chimneys, thick and choking. Carver had turned it into a fortress. Tama knelt beside her, scanning the valley. "They will come," he said. "They already have," she replied. That night, under cover of snow and silence, they lit the first fire. It started with the Granger barn, an inferno by midnight. Then the smokehouse. Then the schoolhouse roof caught from an errant spark. By morning, Black Hollow woke to ruin. Tama moved like a shadow, swift and deliberate. He struck without warning and vanished before their rifles could find him. Rachel kept the watch, scouted the high points, laid traps in the pass. They were hunted now, full and proper. Carver led the search himself, with 30 men and dogs. They combed the ridge for days, but the wind and snow betrayed them. And then they found the old mine. It was Rachel's idea, an abandoned shaft from the Silver Rush days, half collapsed, but deep enough to hold them. There, they laid in wait, watching the posse gather near the rocks below. "They're close," she said. Tama nodded. "Then we speak again." Rachel frowned. "You sure about this?" He didn't answer with words, only took the powder can and set the fuse. The blast shattered the mountainside. A roar of flame and stone sent half the posse tumbling into darkness. Horses screamed. Men bled. Carver lived barely. Burned, broken, dragged back to town by the 3 survivors left standing. Word spread. They weren't just hunting an outlaw anymore. They were being hunted by one, and by the woman who rode beside him. Rachel Wren, widow, Eler, traitor. Tama, ghost of the burning plains. They were legend now, but even legends run out of mountains. One night, as they camped beneath the stars, Rachel turned to him and asked, "What happens when they stop fearing us?" Tama stared at the sky. "Then we burn what's left." She thought on that a while. Watch the fire dance. But if we burn everything, she said slowly, what's left for the living? Tama didn't answer, but in his silence, she heard the question he hadn't yet asked. How far can we go before we become the very thing we're fighting? She lay awake long after the fire died, listening to the wind carry their names through the trees. By morning, smoke rose on the horizon again. This time it wasn't theirs. Someone else had set the match. Someone who wanted them gone, permanently. Rachel stood, jaw tight, and loaded her rifle. The storm was coming, and she would meet it with fire. Snow fell like ash from a dying sky. Rachel crouched low behind a tangle of scrub pine, eyes fixed on the dark line of riders coming up the ridge. There were 7 of them now. Carver out front, bandaged, hunched like a broken scarecrow, but alive. The rest were younger men, hard-eyed, tight-lipped, eager for blood. They carried torches, and that meant one thing. They didn't plan to arrest her. They planned to burn what was left. Tama stood beside her, motionless as stone, the bow across his back and a rifle in his hands. His face was streaked with soot, jaw set like granite. They won't stop, she whispered. They never do, he said. Below them, the mine sat silent. Smoke no longer rose from its mouth, and the bodies had been taken by scavengers or silence. Rachel didn't know which. All she knew was that Carver wouldn't return to town until he'd hung her corpse from the gatepost. Or Thomas. Or both. She tightened her grip on the rifle. Do we run? She asked. Tama didn't blink. No. His answer wasn't bravado. It was clarity. He'd stopped running the day he bled into her snow. Then we ended. They moved like ghosts through the brush, weaving a narrow path that curved toward the pass where the riders would come through. Rachel's boots were soaked through, her fingertips numb. Her body screamed for warmth, rest, mercy, but she had none to give and none to ask for. As they reached the bluff, Tama paused, crouching low. He pointed with 2 fingers, swift and precise. They split there. 4 to the left. 3 take the ridge. We wait for the rear. Rachel nodded. Her heart beat in her throat. Somewhere, Jasper whined, a soft sound from the shadows, anxious but alert. The ambush came fast. Rachel dropped the first man with a single shot, the crack of her rifle splitting the dawn. Tama leapt from the rocks like a panther, blade flashing. The second rider gurgled, blood frothing at his lips before he hit the ground. The third spun to fire, too slow. Rachel fired again. Then silence. They vanished into the rocks before the others could double back. From above, Carver's voice bellowed through the pass. You think you can pick us off like cowards? Show yourselves. Rachel almost laughed at the absurdity. Cowards? They'd stood alone while the whole world turned on them. They'd bled, burned, lost everything but each other, and they were still standing. Tama pulled her into the trees, deeper into the choke of stone and pine. Smoke now wafted from behind them. Carver's men had lit the brush, hoping to flush them out. The fire crackled hungry and mean, licking the snow into steam. We've got an hour before this place is ash, Rachel said. Tama glanced at the flame, then at her. Then we burn back. They found the canyon's choke point, a narrow cut where the land dipped into a bottleneck. There, they buried powder charges Rachel had carried for weeks, waiting for a moment like this. While she worked, Tama gathered brush and deadwood, packing it tight around the pass. The fire would come for them. That much was certain. But first, it would swallow their enemies whole. Carver and his men descended into the canyon not long after, torches high, rifles readied. They moved cautiously now, the cockiness of yesterday burned away by blood and loss. Rachel watched from a ledge above, flint in hand. Her fingers trembled as she struck the spark, not from fear, but from the weight of what she was about to do. Forgive me, Eli, she thought, but I won't die for their lies. The powder ignited with a roar. Flame rushed outward, devouring the dry wood in a curtain of heat and fury. Screams rose as men stumbled into the blaze. Rifles dropped. Horses reared and fled. Rachel ducked low, Tama beside her, both of them shielded by the rocks. And when the smoke cleared, Carver alone remained. He stood, coat burned, one hand clutching a scorched pistol, the other dragging his useless leg behind him. "Rachel Wren," he rasped, "you ain't no better than the savages you protect." She stepped forward slowly, rifle lowered, but eyes sharp. "You mean the people you murdered for their land?" His lip curled. "They're killers. Always have been." Tama moved beside her, blood on his face, voice like iron. "And you? I brought law to this place," Carver spat. "Order." Rachel's voice dropped to a whisper, sharp as a blade. "You brought ash and bone." Carver raised the pistol. Tama was faster. One shot. Carver dropped like a felled tree, eyes still open, pistol falling from his lifeless fingers. The wind howled through the pass once more. Rachel stood still, heart pounding, hands tight at her sides. She'd seen death before, too much of it, but this was different. This was justice, raw and unfinished. She looked at Tama. "It's done." He shook his head. "No, it begins." They rode at first light, away from the ash and ruin. The land ahead was untouched, wide, and still wild. They passed no towns, no wagons, only the endless spread of trees and snow and sky. Rachel rode in silence, her thoughts as jagged as the cliffs they passed. She should have felt peace, relief, something close to victory. But all she felt was the weight of what they'd become, what they'd lost to survive. That night, they made camp by a frozen stream. Tama sat beside the fire, sharpening a blade with deliberate care. Rachel warmed her hands, staring into the flames. After a long silence, she said, "You think we're heroes now?" Tama didn't look up. "No." She nodded. "Me neither." He looked at her then, the firelight dancing in his eyes. "But we're free." That word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Free from the town that betrayed them. Free from lies. Free from the blood oath of silence. And maybe that was enough. Rachel looked toward the stars, each one cold and brilliant and far beyond reach. "They'll come for us again," she said. Tama stood, staring out into the trees. "Let them." In the distance, a wolf howled. Jasper stirred beside her, and Rachel Wren, once healer, now outlaw, closed her eyes and let the fire warm her bones. She had survived the storm. Now she would ride the wind.